Hello, welcome to day 9. Today we're doing more graphing and key features of sine and cosine. To start this warm-up, can you please pause this video and given this graph, can you tell me the amplitude, period, and midline? So pause and fill in whatever you can. So to help me answer this, I would actually go out of order. It would help me to identify the midline first. The midline will be all of our middle points. And that midline was at y equals -2. From the midline, I'm able to identify the amplitude, which is a distance. A distance is always positive. So if I find the distance from the midline to the maximum, so mid to max, the amplitude is 3. And then finally, for the period, I can choose anywhere on my graph to start to count this period. So if I start at 3 pi, since there's a dot there, since 3 pi starts at a maximum, I can highlight one cosine graph, and that will tell me the period. So if I highlight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, that is one cosine graph. To figure out the period, it will be the distance between 7 pi and 3 pi, which is 4 pi. And then just to show you that I could have started somewhere else and I could have highlighted a sine graph instead, if I did the period again, and let's say this time I start at 8 pi. If I start at 8 pi, which is on the midline, I would be highlighting one sine graph. One period of a sine graph would be those 5 points, and then if I were to find the distance between them, between 8 pi and 12 pi, it would still be 4 pi. So you can start anywhere, either identify a sine graph or a cosine graph, and just highlight one cycle, and the period will always be the same. Next on your notes, you see summary sheet. We actually have the whole front of it filled out, so I'm not going to add anything else. My summary sheet is good to go. And as we go to our first example, first I want to read the directions, as these are the common directions that you will see on your assessments. First of all, you're stating the key features. So given each function, state the amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift. Then graph one period of the function. Be sure to include and label both axes. So I need to see your x-axis labeled with the points you get from your table, and I need to see your y-axis labeled with your midline and your amplitude, so to tell me the maximum and the minimum. So I do need to see your tick marks on both of those axes. Okay, so first, to start, let's identify the key features. Minus 4 will be our first blank. And just kind of thinking of our assessments that are coming up at the end of the year, these questions are examples of 3A key feature questions. Okay, so to figure out the amplitude is my A value, which is 2. It is a distance, so again, it is always positive. To figure out the period is 2 pi over b. Well, my b value, there's nothing here, so there is secretly a 1. Oops, let me rewrite that. Secretly a 1 out in front. So my period is 2 pi over 1, which is just 2 pi. My phase shift, this tells me where I am moving left and right. and this will come from my C value, and it's in our X box. So since I see a minus 3 pi over 2, I know X box opposite, it's the inverse operation. I'm really going to the right 3 pi over 2. And then finally my vertical shift is the D value at the end. Since there's a minus 4, this graph is moving down 4. And another thing about this D value is it tells you where the midline is. Midline. And then other information that we get from these key features, since my A value in this problem is positive, I know that the behavior of this graph, my end result, should look like a cosine graph, so start at a minimum or maximum. Since my A value is positive, it should start at a maximum and look just like that. So my points will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can use that little sketch to check my work when I'm done. So let's make our table. My x coordinates that I will always use are those quadrantals from around my unit circle. 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Alright, so now if I look inside of my x box, my b value is 1. No need to multiply by 1. The c value is a minus 3 pi over 2, so I know that I will do plus 3 pi over 2. Again, we always do the inverse operation, so let's go ahead and add. I get to pi, and I don't have a common denominator. If I rewrote pi to be 2 pi over 2, I can then do 3 plus 2, which is 5 pi over 2. Then I can continue. And then same thing, when I get to 2 pi, I don't have a common denominator, but if I rewrite it, 2 pi is equivalent to 4 pi over 2. Now I can go ahead and add. And just looking, I can simplify 4 pi over 2, and I can simplify 6 pi over 2. Okay, so these are the 5 points that I will label on my x-axis. So right now we're going to take these 5 points, we're going to copy and paste them directly onto my x-axis. So they're all positive, so they're all on the right side. So I will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm labeling 3 pi over 2. 2 pi. 5 pi over 2. 3 pi. 7 pi over 2. So just by making that table, I already shifted my graph to the right 3 pi over 2. I automatically did it. Now to label my y-axis, first let's label our midline. So our midline is down 4. So at negative 4 is my midline, and from my midline I am going to use my amplitude. So from the midline I can go up 2 and down 2. So the maximum my graph will go is negative 2, and the minimum my graph will go is negative 6. So if I use this little sketch that I have in the corner, I'm reminding myself it's a positive cosine, so my very first point will be at a maximum. Whoops, I want a pen. Then midline, minimum, midline, maximum. Notice how what I could do if I wanted to check my work here, my maximum have those 2 points included, and my minimum has that 1 point included. So every point is either on a maximum, a midline, or a minimum. That is the only place that my points can be. So now let's just connect our dots. And voila, this matches exactly that little sketch that I had in the upper left-hand corner. Let's go on to the last problem. Okay, my blank for my last problem is a -3. This is your circled problem, so this is the problem your teacher will give you feedback on. I do want to give you one hint to get you started. Identifying your B and C values, and my class calls it your Xbox. Since I have a B value that isn't 1 and a C value, when you are creating your table, I need to do the inverse of both of those operations. So this is going to have 2 steps in it. My first step is, since I see a 1/2, I will do times 2, because that is the inverse operation. And since I see a plus pi, instead I will do minus pi. So this table has 2 steps. First, multiply everything by 2, and then use those values and subtract pi from there. So again, this is the problem that your teacher will give you feedback on. Go ahead and try it.